All right, this is going to be the third and final video lesson on the axial skeleton. And today we're going to look at the vertebral column and the ribs and the sternum. So let's go ahead and get this educational show on the road. All right, welcome to lesson 3. Today we're going to talk about the vertebral column, and this should wrap us up for everything left in the axial skeleton. So the spine is composed of a series of bones called the vertebrae. The vertebrae typically consist of a body, which is this large portion here. My pen isn't writing. There it goes. There, I circled it quite a bit. The pedicle and lamina forming the vertebral arch that surrounds the spinal cord. So this small section here and here are the pedicle, and the lamina are the back portions here and here. And they together, all of them, will surround the spinal cord, which is going to go down this big gap right there. And then there will be several processes. Remember, a process is any projection that comes off of a bone. And that will be for the attachment of muscles. So right here, we have this large process and its partner over here. Those are transverse processes. And this guy that sticks out the back, that is a spinous process. So when you were a kid and they checked you for scoliosis, which is an unnatural curvature of the spine, they would have you lean forward, and then they could see the ridges, your spine as it runs down the middle of your back. And what they were looking at were the bumps that you see on someone's back when they lean forward. That is the spinous process there sticking up. And if they are in line, then the spinal column is in line. The vertebral column, there are 7 cervical vertebrae. Cervical vertebrae are in your neck. There are 7 of them, and they are typically referred to as, collectively, for quick reference, they refer to them as C1 through C7. Clearly, C stands for cervical. 1 stands for the first one. That would be the most superior of all of them. Now, it turns out that the first 2 are very special vertebrae. They work together to allow us to turn our head, to allow our skull to pivot, and we can look right and left because those vertebrae will articulate with each other. And that first C1 vertebrae is called atlas, and the one underneath it, the C2 vertebrae, is referred to as axis. But we'll get into that here in a little bit. There are 12 vertebrae in your chest, and they are called the thoracic vertebrae, and they are unique because they have a pair of ribs that articulate with them. So the top 7 are in your neck. The next 12, the thoracic, numbered T1 through T12, have ribs. Everyone has 12 pair or 24 ribs. Whether you're male or female, everybody has the same number, and that's 12. And the very lower part of your back, the lumbar region, you have 5 vertebrae, and they are L1 through L5. And so if you hear people talk about a back injury, or if they have a problem with one of their intervertebral discs, especially in their lower back, oh yeah, it's my L4, between my L4 and my L5. And so that would be the disc right here that is between L4 and L5. And then there is the sacrum. The sacrum is the portion of fused vertebrae, usually about 4 or 5 in there, that no longer articulate with each other. It's just a big hunk of bone. And we have the vestigial tailbone, the coccyx, which is what's left of our ancestral tail. and they are the result of fusion of several vertebrae. From the cervical region to the sacrum, each vertebra has a large central hole or foramen. We call it, remember, any hole or opening is a foramen. Then that's called the vertebral foramen, in which the spinal cord will travel. At each segmental level on both the right and left sides, there is an intervertebral foramen is formed for the exiting of spinal nerves. So here you can see there's a gap here on the side, and we have a spinal nerve that comes off to begin the branching network of the, millions and millions of nerves that run through your body, that network that run through your body. They all have to branch off of the spinal cord somewhere, and they do that through the intervertebral foramen. Inter meaning short for intermediate or in between. So this is a hole that is in between two vertebrae, as its name would suggest. A tough fibrocartilage intervertebral disc is found between the bodies of adjacent vertebrae. Remember, we talked in the tissues unit the difference in the kinds of cartilage: hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. And the fibrocartilage is that tough, fibrous kind of cartilage that will make the intervertebral discs. It functions to absorb vertical shock and form joints which are strong yet still permit movement of the spine. When viewed from the front, a normal adult vertebral column appears straight. When viewed from the side, it has 4 slight bends, which constitute the normal spinal curvatures that I was just talking about. So number 1, this area are the cervical, the 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, and the fused sacrum and coccyx. Relative to the front of the body, the cervical and lumbar curves are convex, which means bulging outward. Outward meaning towards, they curve out towards the front. The thoracic and sacral curves are concave, cupping in. All right, so depending on which way we're talking about the curve, are we talking about this side or this side? So bulging out, the lumbar is gonna curve this way. That's the out they're talking about. And cervical are gonna bulge out towards the front. The thoracic and sacral are concave, cupping in. So here's the cup. But if you're talking about from the back, they're going to curve out this way towards the posterior. So when they say bulging out, they really mean bulging forward. And the cupping of the thoracic are going to be, that cup will then be facing the front or anterior. And here we talk about some of the abnormal curvatures of the spine. Various conditions may exaggerate the normal spinal curves, sometimes causing severe disability. So if someone has scoliosis, you can see their spine has an unnatural right to left, a lateral curvature. Kyphosis is when the thoracic vertebrae poke out too far or back too far. And then lordosis is when the lumbar curve in too far, curve that way too far. So again, those are the 3 unnatural curvatures: scoliosis, kyphosis, and lordosis. All right, let's talk about some of the individual vertebrae. You have your cervical, again, 7, your thoracic, 12, and your lumbar that are made up of 5. Some of the differences here listed in the chart: your cervical are small, the thoracic are larger, but the lumbar are the largest. The foramina, the big difference between these vertebrae is that the cervical vertebrae are the only ones that have 3 foramina, or 3 holes. And you can see here's the big one for the spinal cord, but you have your cervical nerves that run down, and they have in the transverse process of this vertebrae, you can see there's another pair of holes, and that every cervical vertebrae have those foramen, and those foramina. So that's one of the distinguishing characteristics. So the foramina in the cervical, there's one vertebral and two transverse. So you'll have two in the transverse process, but the other vertebrae only have the one. So if you pick up a vertebrae and look down and you see three holes, then you know it's from the neck. It's a cervical vertebrae. The spinous process is slender, often bifid, meaning it has two little points there. The transverse process are small. The articular facet for the ribs, well, that's only going to be here in the thoracic. So that's where you'll see that. The direction of articular facets, meaning which way they face, is slightly different for each one. And the size of the intervertebral disc, they don't show the discs here, but clearly, since the lower back, everything in your lower back, everything above your hips is all supported by these five vertebrae. So that's why we have, as human beings, is why we have back problems, because it's hard. No engineer is ever going to tell you that the best base is a tiny little column. You know, if you're building something, you want a wide, sturdy base. Well, everything from our hips up is balancing on five individual little vertebrae, and that's one of the reasons why we have back problems as an upright walking organism. The cervical vertebrae comprise the bony spine and the neck. C1 is called atlas, as I was mentioning a few slides ago, because it holds up the head the way the Titan of Greek mythology, Atlas, held up the earth. C2 is called axis because it provides a pivot, allowing the head to turn on the neck. So when you turn your head, your C1 vertebrae stays in position at the bottom of your skull. Atlas stays tucked up against your skull. But it will pivot around the dens, which is the little post on the axis, or the C2 vertebrae. So your head, a lot of people naturally assume that when you turn your head spins, but all of your vertebrae stay straight. Well, that's not the case. When you turn your head, your C1 vertebrae turns with you, but it pivots around the C2 vertebrae. Without these two, the first two specialized cervical vertebrae, the head-on neck range of motion would be very limited. So this is C1. So your skull is going to articulate with those two surfaces there. And when you turn your head, then this vertebrae is going to pivot this way. And it will swing around. It will swing around that process called the dens. Kind of hard to illustrate on the PowerPoint. It would be a lot easier if I had an actual spinal column and skull here in my hands, but that will be for a different video lesson. Below the neck, each of the 12 pair of thoracic vertebrae articulate with a rib to form the posterior part of the thoracic cage. So what to look for when you hold up a thoracic vertebrae are these little notches right here on the end of the transverse process, and a little bump. And a little bump right there. Excuse me, that is going to be the spot where the ribs attach. So the head of the rib is going to attach here. It's going to rub up against the transverse process and then curve around this way. And you can see every one of them have a spot that is there for their particular pair of ribs. Because the lumbar vertebrae bear greater loads, they are much stouter than their more superior cousins, meaning the cervical and thoracic vertebrae, and stouter meaning they're bigger, thicker, larger vertebrae. They are the biggest of all. The sacrum is a single triangular body formed from a fusion of 5 separate vertebrae in utero, meaning that happens when you were growing inside mom's uterus during fetal development. So you can see, you just count, you still have these foramina. So there's a hole there, 2, 3, 4. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different vertebrae all fused together. And then you have what's left, our tailbone. This is all that's left of our tail. And that is those little bitty guys right there. And you can see there are 4 very, very small, very reduced vertebrae left from our ancestral tail. The coccyx, commonly referred to as the tailbone, is the final segment of the bony spine. It is also an in utero fusion of 3 to 5 separate vertebrae. So again, they all fuse together when you were baking in mom's uterus. Let's move to your thorax. The thoracic cage is the final part of the axial skeleton. In addition to the thoracic vertebrae, it is formed from the sternum and the ribs and the cartilage that attaches the ribs to the sternum, called the costal cartilage. Please do not say coastal. Coast is C-O-A-S-T. This is C-O-S-T, cost. So how much does it cost? Well, this is costal cartilage. Its functions are to enclose and protect the organs of the thoracic and abdominal cavities. So it primarily makes, its job is to make a volume closed container for our breathing. But some of your liver and stomach will also be kind of tucked in the very bottom of your rib cage, helping protect it. But its main job is to make that breathing chamber for your lungs and protect your heart. Provides support for bones of the upper limbs and plays a role in breathing. The sternum or breastbone is located anteriorly in the center of the thoracic wall. This consists of the manubrium, which is the very top part of the sternum, the body, which is the middle section, and then the little tip down at the bottom called the xiphoid process. The 12 pairs of ribs give structural support to the sides of the thoracic cavity. The costal, having to do with the ribs, cartilages are bars of hyaline cartilage connecting the sternum to the ribs, and they contribute to the elasticity of the thoracic cage, which is what allows your chest cavity to expand and contract when you breathe. So here is a diagram of the sternum. So if you look at it on the body here, this is the very top of your sternum right there, called the manubrium. The large piece here in the center is the body, and then the tip of it right down here that you have to find before you give CPR to someone is the xiphoid process, and that's the little guy down there, because they tell you don't want to break that off. So you don't want to do your compressions down here. You want to do your chest compressions up here, so you don't break that off, which would cause a whole new set of problems for that person. And here we see the numbering of the ribs. Remember, you have 12 pair or 24 total. The top 7 are referred to as true ribs because they all have their own piece of cartilage that attaches them to the sternum. 6 and 7, you can see right there, it comes all the way up. The next 3 are called false ribs because they share cartilage that connects them to the sternum. And then your bottom 2, little old 11 and 12 down here, you can see 11 right here on this side. They do not attach. You can see the free end of it right there and right there. Those ribs do not attach to your sternum, and they're referred to as floating ribs. And all of that I just said is going to be examined right here. The upper 7 pairs of ribs are called true ribs because they attach directly to the sternum with just a small piece of costal cartilage. The bottom 5 pair, and this number can vary from one individual to another, are called false ribs. They attach indirectly to the sternum with an elongated piece of costal cartilage, or not at all, as in ribs 11 through 12, which are referred to as floating ribs, or like I just said 2 slides ago. And that is all I have for the axial skeleton. All right, that's going to wrap up everything for not only this video lesson, but for all of the video lessons on the axial skeleton. As always, if you have any questions, shoot me an email, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.